I'm Michelle Fine at the CUNY Graduate Center, and for the All-In Conference on Activist Scholarship, we are a research collective of academics, activists. Some of us are all of the above. Some of us are formerly incarcerated. Some of us are survivors of domestic violence. And together we are a research collective that has dedicated ourselves to documenting, implementing, and organizing around an amazing law in New York State called the Domestic Violence Survivor Justice Act, passed in 2019. You will hear something about the law, something about this incredible collective of lawyers, activists, social scientists, and those of us who are many of the above. And then we really want to focus on why research collectives should be ground and anchored in the perspective of those who are most impacted.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Anissa Sabor. I am the current coordinator for the Coalition for Women's Prisoners, but I'm also a member of this advisory group. Thank you for having me and talk a little bit about the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act. This was a bill that was designed and drafted by directly impacted women from Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, along with community members and the coalition members in New York State. This bill came about because we could not understand why women were getting such extensive sentencing being survivors of violence. And so we began to do some research inside and outside of the prisons to see what we could do to alleviate some of the pressures from the long sentence for women who are survivors of violence. And with that, this campaign became a 10-year-long fight with many, many women from the inside, many women on the outside, women who had gotten out and reached back, wanted to be a part of making sure that this law was implemented and that it actually became law.
Hi, I'm Kate Mogilescu. I'm a public defender in New York. The acronym that we'll use for this law is the DVSJA, the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act. Was passed in 2019, and there's two primary components to it. The first is an ability for survivors of domestic violence at the time that they are facing sentencing to seek a reduced or alternate sentence if they can make a showing that their experience with domestic violence was connected to the offense for which they are about to be sentenced. The other provision is a backward-looking or resentencing provision that allows survivors who are currently incarcerated to seek a reduction of their sentence if they can show that same thing, the connection between the abuse they've experienced and the offense for which they have been serving their sentence. So in 2019, when the law was passed, there was this moment, I think, of, okay, well, what do we do now? All this work has gone into the legislative advocacy and how do we implement this? How do we create any sort of accountability for the state, for courts, for the very systems that we know to be deeply flawed and have harmed people extensively for years? We can't simply just look to them now and say, okay, well, this law will be implemented without issue. So this group came together to do exactly that, to watch what was happening, to track it, to enforce some sort of accountability, and to ask questions of the stakeholders involved here to make sure that the law was living up to its potential.
Cheryl and I came out of prison more than a decade ago, and we went to get mass incarceration was a critical social crisis. And we wanted to see if we could mobilize the university with all of its different disciplines to be involved as an activist force. And we also knew that people in the university, many of them don't have direct experience with the issues of mass incarceration. And drawing on the fact that we were part of Bedford Hill, we understood the power and the strength of people who are directly impacted coming together with a vision of change. And so we ended up building something called the Center for Justice, that are people like ourselves who had experienced the issues that building a movement of mass incarceration creates. I think that what we found was that the direct experience that people had with the system was critical around informing people about the nature of the system and what it does, and in coming up with visions about what would make things better.
Yeah, I want to add to that and probably take it back a little bit as to thinking about these were our friends, these were our sisters, you know, and these were kids of our friends, you know, that who have experienced their mom in situations that led to prison, and now they're older and now they understand a little more. And so, and looking to us because unfortunately their parents, their mom is still in prison, you know? And so what can we do as not just folks who are out here advocating for change, but as sisters who know, as sisters who understand that we have women inside that are still locked up for defending themselves. And there are systems that are in place that make you scared to even speak out and talk out in the earlier stages, because then you'll become the one that that started the incident, or you didn't go to the police to report things. No, I didn't, because you're not going to do anything about it, and you're going to charge me with it, and I'm going to be separated from my kids, and all of the things that go along with blaming a woman for defending herself. And so we've, you know, this is our life's work, and we'll continue to do this, you know, probably in this life and the next, come back and haunt you.
Hi, I'm Judy Clark, and I did 38 years in Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. I got out a little over a year ago. I did research with Michelle and Maria on our college program that we came in, that we built in Bedford. And I think that a lot of the work that we did over the years was always saying that when there are problems, the people who are most impacted by those problems are the ones that are going to have to lift everyone up in order to change that situation. There's a lot of research done in prisons, and usually we're the objects of that research. And it's particularly ironic because on the one hand, we're the objects of other people's objectifying research, but also that at the same time, our actual reality and humanity and conditions of living are completely invisible to the outside world. So one of the things that I experienced when I was inside was that oftentimes the conditions under which the things we were facing, we felt very much alone. You know, we didn't feel, even though in fact there were all these people doing work on the outside, we didn't have that feeling. We had a feeling of being isolated. So one of the things that I felt strongly in joining this effort was to really try to have an intimate connection between those of us on the outside, so now I'm on the outside, and those that I had just so recently left behind. And part of that is by actually connecting to individuals. Part of it meant that when we had a list of 400, however many names of women in the facilities who might be eligible to utilize this law, I knew most of these women, you know, and therefore could feel like, oh, wow, you know, she's been trying to get a lawyer and this is what happened to her. And like, they were not names or numbers to me, they were real people. And I think that this work to do research rooted in that idea that each individual is a person with a story, and that how most of us ended up inside, most of the women who ended up inside ended up there was because their story was obliterated. It was never allowed to be told.
Hi, my name's Monica. I served 23 years in Bedford. I was just recently released in January. I'm a directly impacted person, and part of my involvement and my interest in the DVSJA is I believe personally that all the work that the women did on the DVSJA is the culmination of my eventual release. And it's a way, you know, of me supporting and giving insight, and it's a way of looking back and making sure that the DVSJA is successful in its implementation, and, you know, looking back towards the women and what they need to help this be successful. And, you know, as a collaboration, and knowing that it's a community that it takes for this to be successful, and I wanted to be part of that community.
My name is Michelle Daniel Jones. I'm a third-year doctoral student at NYU. I think this moment of the DVSJA is critical. I think this is a moment to say those things that led to an instance of a moment, of a violent moment, or whatever that happened is important. And that it's not a deal being made between the attorneys on what should weigh here, should she testify. No, this is a moment to say, listen to women and believe women, to epistemically privilege that now that their experiences, because it's a part of a long trajectory for most women. They just don't wake up one day and their lives explode in violence and it's not connected to anything. It is always connected. And this DVSJA project gives us opportunity to reclaim that in a strong way. And the applications are huge across the country for other women who are sitting in solitary confinements in prisons across the country who have very similar circumstances, but have no one, who have no one on the ground doing what the women in New York did for them.
So my name is Melissa Mahabir, and I'm a social worker. There are many components to this whole project, the whole project of ensuring widespread statewide implementation of the law. So with the women, most importantly, we're doing outreach and we're connecting to women in the inside. And we have an amazing group, formerly incarcerated women who are part of this group who are working on a resource guide that we want to make available to women inside. And so that will include material about the law and criteria on their eligibility. And then also a big piece of it is going to be around their narrative. And just as Judy was talking about earlier, how important it is to share your true narrative and how important that is in any effort you're doing to be released. And so we're working on that. We also have a goal of creating a system that some sort of group of volunteers or social workers that can eventually probably work inside on a team with women and their attorneys to help with all of the work, all the case preparation work that it takes to bring your case back to court. Within the legal community, we want to work with attorneys who are working on resentencing cases, who are working on cases for survivors who are up for their initial sentencing. We want to educate judges through trainings and then open up conversations with prosecutors around DVSJA and domestic violence, criminalized survivors.
So I'm Maria Elena Torre. I teach at CUNY with Michelle, and I run the public science project there. This project really is a wonderful, powerful, at times heartbreaking project that shows when activists and lawyers and academics come together, how research can be used as a tool for justice. Research that's grounded, as Cheryl said, in love and in outrage and in a sense of responsibility. I think that the ways in which we are, as you've heard, working on multiple levels to keep women and men's lives complicated in the ways that the legal system can't, in the ways that sometimes activism has to focus on a clean story. This project hopefully will provide resources that that folks can use on many different levels to try to chip away at the historic injustices that women of color have faced in intimate violence, who experience intimate violence, and others as well.
I do want to say that we are a collective rich for our differences, and that's a gift. Earlier we were having a hard conversation just about how race and gender and who's going to win from this law, and what a heartbreak it will be if the women of color who really worked hard to get this law passed themselves don't benefit from it. And yet that's a position that we all come from in a shared way and in very distinct ways. And so as Maria and Cheryl have said, this is a project rooted in love and sisterhood and a radical sense of what's possible and a painful sense of what's true. And we will see you all in October, and stay safe.